Welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is Kate Abbey-Lambertz. She's product director for Outlier Media, which has been one of the breakthrough nonprofit newsrooms and using text to build an audience that really appreciates what they're doing. Thanks.
Thank you. So if you caught David's session, I was very relieved to find out we've got like maybe half a slide of overlapping content. And if you're interested in texting, this is like a great way to see a little bit closer on how one newsroom is doing it. If you're not so much on texting, I think that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is our approach as a outlet, which happens a lot through texting, but can also happen in other forms. So I'm going to figure out how to use the clicker and pull up my notes that I lost. No, it's back to lunch. So Outlier was founded in 2016 by Sarah Alvarez in Detroit, really looking at ways that we can fill information gaps for Detroiters who are not getting critical information that they need. I came in about 2 years ago. And so in 2016, started with texting mostly about housing, utilities, and transportation. And we also started with a tax foreclosure lookup. So people could text in an address and we would tell them if they had property taxes that were overdue. And that was important because thousands of properties were getting foreclosed on, even though their mortgages were paid, because owners didn't know that they had overdue taxes or couldn't afford their overdue taxes. So kind of a big accountability and quality of life issue. And this was an easy way for people to get that information. So when we talk, I'm gonna do it over and over again. Yeah, and so we think about that kind of content as information that fills an info gap. So looking at those info gaps, I think it's really easy in the big picture to see what happens when they're not filled. Our example here is that kind of long-term systemic effect on property and on people, and how the info gap kind of lets that persist. Great. The reason that we kind of got into texting was mostly to be able to do this kind of short form reference information. We first, to kind of fill those info gaps, we say, what are people's info gaps? That's really hard for people to tell you about, like, what is the information I don't know? So we go back a step and say, what are people's resource gaps? Resource gaps can be kind of proxies for information gaps. And to figure out what people's resource gaps are, we use a lot of data. We look at United Way 211 data to see what people are calling in for help about. And we look at police data, we look at census data, we look at a lot of kind of general data sets. And then we also do a bunch of surveying where we ask people about what kinds of challenges they're having in the last week and in the last month, which kind of helps you understand the urgent need and the kind of long-term need. And I just pulled in some things here. Some of these are from Subtext clients. And we've got the voice note newsletter, Subu. There's a lot of reasons to think about texting. It is not the only way to fill info gaps, and you can do a lot of other things besides fill info gaps. But one of the ways that it has kind of persisted, it's felt like it's kind of come back around from 2016, is the way that we've looked at platforms kind of controlling traffic from Google to social media, et cetera. Having that access to your audience and ownership of it has felt really critical for us. And then, I think that one of the other things that's changed a lot is internet access and phone access. And while most people have some access to the internet at some points in their day or their week or their life, there is still a lot of gap. And if you have relied on data on your plan or on your phone to access the internet, you know that you're like a little bit more careful about what you're spending your time on. And the idea that an article is going to be the way that the thing you're going to turn to when you're looking for something really important, like, do you owe $2,000 or you could lose your house? It feels like even if it is a narrowing group of people who require SMS, it can still be the most efficient way to get that information to them. I also just wanted to say that, one of the things that we have that kind of, I think, prompted Sarah and has changed somewhat in Detroit, but still feels very pressing, is the way the economics of the news industry have been. Dailies and other outlets have gone where the advertisers want them to go, looking for audiences with whom advertising resonates, kind of at a large scale. Obviously reporters are not doing that in their individual reporting, but it can feel like the reporting ends up being about an audience rather than for that audience. And so thinking about, an outlet that was built really to kind of serve directly those users without the kind of constraints of what advertising might require, whether it's about the demographics of that audience or like income demographics, or about like placements for advertisements. So this is the kind of basics of our text system, and it's been fairly similar for the last 5 or 6 years. Pretty simple. We text 3 times a week in the morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's based on generally when people are around and interested in getting a text for us, and also, kind of reporter capacity. We send out 15,000 texts over the course of a week, and that's all based on, again, reporter capacity and cost per message. And we send out a broadcast that is usually very, very straightforward. Like, you can get information about X program that starts next week, or just, this is Kate at Outlier Media, and I can help you with your landlord or transportation. Use this keyword, text reporter, if you need help from us. So that is, that's as simple as it gets, and then people can text back. And now try it later if you want. But just so I know it's hard to kind of picture what it looks like. But you can kind of see the menu, you can see the property lookup if you want, you can try a different property. And I'll look for them for your messages if they come in, and respond to them a little bit later. But yeah. And just a little bit more on that address piece. When someone texts an address, what is happening is our little backend is using RAG AI and querying our database and finding the row with the address and pulling in the register of deeds information and stringing together sentences based on text that we have written about the status of the taxes and what someone might do if they do have tax debt. And then it is also going in and pulling the city rental registry information to pull back information about whether the property is registered as a rental, which most are not. And that's very common, but it's not supposed to happen. So then there's also some resources about what you might do if you're having a problem with a unregistered property, or if you are a landlord, how you might register your property. Okay. Any texts that need my help? Okay, someone thinks mobile Me&You is great, and they didn't get the answer that they were looking for. Just, Sorry, you can't see it. But just know that it's happening. That's one of the things that we deal with all the time. Right. So in the newsroom, we have a website where we publish articles. We have newsletters. We have social media. We now have a TikTok. But when Outlier started, there was just a text line. And then there were relationships with other news outlets where occasionally reporting would get published that had some sort of grounding in the text service. We spent a lot of time rebuilding our text system, and we are in the middle of kind of transitioning back to a model that focuses on, that prioritizes the text-based conversations. The way that it works is pretty simple, but you know, we send out a lot of broadcasts, and then people can also text in. Both happen in a given week. A lot of the times when people are using the system, they are using the keywords that we have with kind of automated information based on those info needs about like what are the most pressing issues. So how to find out where your bus stop is, how to like complain about your property. It's a lot of property related stuff, and a lot more. And then after they do that, 90% of people go quiet and they don't say anything. And we, for the most part, let them be unless it's something we're kind of tracking more closely. And then the other 10% come in and they have a question, could be, who is this? But a lot of the time it's something more intense. A lot of the time they've gone through all of the housing related menu items and they haven't gotten the answer they wanted. And so they need a reporter. And we're continuing to add automated information, which is all, sorry, that is not AI, that is all keyword based with those kind of conditional rules. But the, you know, we think there will always be a need for the reporter, and that piece has like more and more value as we go into more AI things. So they get their auto reply. They may text reporter, and then we've got an editor who will assign out those conversations kind of based on reporter beats and what people have availability for, sometimes doing a little bit of the advanced work of hey, I like if you don't understand what someone's asking about, trying to get a little bit more information so you can assign it out more effectively. And then the reporter comes in, and those one-on-one conversations happen very differently. Sometimes, a lot of times it's a phone call. A lot of times someone is trying to articulate what's going on with them, and it's just too hard to put in a text message. And it's easier for the user to handle by phone. Sometimes they just have a quick question that you can, I was answering a couple voting questions this weekend, like what happens if I vote straight ticket? Like, does my vote count for these other things? Very easy stuff. Sometimes it requires a lot of reporting. I was looking at one from a reporter, Laura, who the person asked about immigration, undocumented immigration rates with Biden versus Trump, something that had come up in a CBS News article. And Laura, a reporter, she interviewed Michigan immigration rights group. She went to Customs and Border Patrol. She went to Pew Research. She like got a bunch of information. None of it felt like it quite got to where she wanted, but kind of kept the conversation going with this person, telling them what she had found out. And this is the kind of thing where, you know, Laura finds out because she Googles it and there's not an easy answer. And it's something someone wants to know, and we don't exactly know how. Whether this is like related, they just want to have accurate information, or it affects how they're going to vote. We have no idea. And we're kind of, if we don't need to know that, we don't need to know that, but we're going to go find out that information. And except at this conference, for the most part, no one is going to know that we do that, because it is not something that, you know, it's verifying information. You know, even though there's a lot of interviewing, it is not specific to kind of our local audience. So we're happy to help this local user, but we're not going to like make an article out of this reporting that happens. So there's a lot that goes on like that. And then what we're adding in now is a little bit more, because we do so much work like that, where we think we're helping people and providing a good service. And then it kind of goes into the ether for the greater world, for funders, for people outside, even inside our newsroom, who are not like in the text message world every day. So we've added in just this kind of impact tracking, so we can kind of see how, see our efficacy. We look at whether we've addressed a problem, helped someone in a crisis, identified an accountability gap, and user satisfaction, and potential new info for SMS. That's not really a impact thing, but we've gotten a question that seems like something that it'll be helpful for other people, so we'll add it. And I just wanted to point out, I think that this is a piece that's very different from how a lot of organizations using SMS work is, yeah, there are sometimes articles, but we don't rely on the text system as a feeder for sources, and we don't, we don't publish an article and then push it out to our readers, at least not exclusively. We're experimenting with that a little bit, but we've really been careful to try to make sure most of our information is available within the text messages themselves, except for in the case of like an application or a longer guide, like a guide to escrow, because we're not lawyers, we can't quite tell someone how to do that, but yeah. This is our back end for anyone who's interested. This is Missive, which is just a chat communications platform. You can use it for email. It's got some of the features of like a Slack type tool where you can @, people and you can have conversations with your own internal team. Pretty simple. What's valuable about it for us is it's got the ability to kind of build in these iframe embeds where we kind of built our broadcaster, since this is really meant for like a customer service type kind of messaging. We've turned it into a distribution platform, which it's not really for. And then we've built in on the side there, you can see the beginnings of our little AI conversation summary. Because we have these like long back and forths and, people text in over the course of several years, and reporters may change, or you might not remember, or maybe there's a lot to go through. We're kind of building in the not aggregate right now, but just one-on-one conversation piece of like what this person was texting about, how did the interaction go? We do get some frustrated, angry people, and sometimes they're just, trolls. But sometimes they still need help and they're just frustrated. And so like we're trying to use this kind of feature to as a flag for a reporter or someone else coming into the conversation, if there's information about the user that would be good to know before going into a conversation with them. We've got a little bit of, you can schedule your text messages for later, which is probably not super novel. It's great for us compared to what we were using before. You can really organize your inbox however you want. So for reporters who are managing 5, 10, up to 50 conversations at a time, having something like this feels really useful in terms of just being able to keep track of how those conversations go, especially since they sometimes do take several weeks of kind of reporting or back and forth. One of the steps that we built in on the kind of reporting workflow side is when you're done with the conversation as it stands, scheduling the follow-up message based on your conversation. So a lot of times we're offering a resource and people will say, cool, thanks. And being able to know if they're actually able to use it and if it was helpful. People rarely come back and tell you that. Sometimes they do and they're very grateful, but they usually don't come back and say like, yes, I used that thing and it worked, especially if it's something that is supposed to work. So making sure that it did, or prompting them if they're still having trouble, that like we can kind of help with the next step. Anything here? You can save messages and, kind of can message, use it. And there's a little bit of like respond positively with an AI prompt using this canned message. I haven't found it great, but something that we're playing with. The other piece that's not in here. We didn't have any kind of analytics in our last platform, and that feels so kind of fundamental if you're, have published an article on a website or sent out a newsletter, to have the kind of, what are people reading, what are people opening, what are they responding to, and we just didn't have the capability to see how that was working, and so that was one of the things that we built in. And we're really trying to do it based on what is our response rate back, how many reporter conversations we're having, really making it about not just how many people are using the system, but how many people are getting help that they basically would not be able to get anywhere else. I just wanted to talk a little bit about when we do publish articles. We have kind of like a harm matrix is what we call it, where we look at if we're seeing stuff come through the text message system. We obviously do reporting based on other things, not in text, but if we see that there is an accountability gap, we look at is it something that affects a lot of Detroiters? Or is it something that maybe doesn't affect a ton of people, but it's like an acute harm? And then the third one being, does this affect Detroit uniquely? AKA, have other people figured this out, other cities, other places, and Detroit is not doing its job? Like, not having proper checks and balances around speculation and the tax auction, and making sure homeowners are not like caught up in rules that they shouldn't be. And so these are just some other stories published over the years that started with someone texting in and saying this city recommended water pipeline warranty program. They said they were fixing it, and then they charged me $3,000. Like, what in the world? Like, that's not fair. And so we go and we like try to help them. And turns out that that a lot of people have had problems with this program, and that since it's a city recommended program, it felt particularly useful. And that's when we published, and then like started getting a bunch of info back from readers in other places talking about all the issues that they had with it. I think that, trying to look, it's very much like a sign of the times here. The foreclosure was probably the biggest impact in Detroit from like 2014 to 2016. So a lot of stuff was about that. DTE has been kind of an ongoing problem for Detroiters, but being able to really see, it's one of those things where, a lot of the times it's not particularly it's like people didn't pay their bills, they got shut off. I guess that's kind of how the system's supposed to work. But being able to like connect the dots between when you see that such a large percentage of your audience is like losing power still during a pandemic, and being able to do the reporting that talks about why that is, I think is one of the things that's been valuable. And sometimes it'll be sourced through text message, and but yeah, not always. And not exclusively. We don't kind of turn a text into a story like on its own. Although we're really trying to, we haven't kind of solved the like, what do we do with the information that is not story worthy, but is kind of interesting or could be useful to someone, but is 2 sentences long. So it's something that we're still thinking about. Oh, I was going to switch these. Okay, so over here on the right, one of the things we've been thinking about is more kind of community content. We've been really focused on utility, like news as utility, those information gaps. We also think about connection gaps and how we can support people when they are not in crisis. And one of the things we produce is a weekly events roundup, and we would love to have that in text message, where we're talking about building in the ability to kind of do some other kinds of lookups besides our property lookups. It would be great if you could look up and find out an event near you. And as a stopgap, I was wondering, can we send some texts about events happening? So I just to see, that's a 1,000 word article, and it took me 27 seconds to scroll all the way through it. So just like a good, an obvious one, but trying to, even for things that are like, this is it's short content, it's little blurbs, but it is like 100% not formatted for SMS as we think of it anyways. I think that, what do I want to say? I think a lot of this is obvious, but the actionable info is one of the things that we think about a lot. We don't usually use text message as like an engagement, a way, you will connect to reporters, but it's not about forming a relationship, and we're not necessarily like trying to prompt a response, or trying to get people further down a funnel. Be great if they use us in other ways, but a lot of we kind of are intentional about the anonymity and people being able to ask us about a property, and they're going to get an answer back, and we're not going to ask them why, and we're not going to tell them they should read our real estate newsletter. They can ask and then go away and never talk to us again. We hope that's not it, but we allow, and we want to like make that easy for people, especially when they're seeking information in vulnerable situations. If there's anything else up here that's worth talking about. Two-way, that was one of the words in David's slide. I think that is the really important thing. I wanted to go back for real this time. For us, like, you look at these text messages, they do not look like a conversation with your friend, right? Like, if your friend sent you back that much text after you said like, hey, what's up? Or, hey, do you know this thing? You'd be like, okay, like, don't send me a novel. But they're also like the right amount of information for the question. We're not trying to have like a back and forth, like a chatbot might ask you like, I'm trying to see an example, like one question and then you give an answer, and then it gives you the follow-up question and you get an answer. Which, you have to do as a chatbot because it has to do the branching. But as a human, you get to kind of say like, here's the basic information, and I'm going to give you a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you the follow-up questions I need if you need it. Otherwise, I'm going to give you everything so you can kind of piece out of the conversation. Ask a question if you need to, but like maybe that's all you needed to know. I also think that, I'm trying to see if these really feel it. The kind of style, we don't have, I think that I would say our style is like informal, but still kind of like authoritative and separate. We say who we are. We're like, hey, sorry, it took me a while to get back to you. I was still looking at it, or I missed something. We talk like we're a real person, but we're, especially with the election stuff coming through, I'm being very careful not to like assume anything about what political affiliation someone might have, or not to even use like Democrat or Republican as an example when I'm talking about how you fill out a ballot, and just being very careful about being warm but not being too kind of familiar, or making it clear that we are this kind of separate entity. We have had people kind of come in and say things where we feel it's necessary to clarify, I'm a journalist, I'm looking into this for you, I cannot solve this for you, I don't work at DTE, I'm not a customer service representative, and I'm going to call and I'm going to see why they're doing this, why this situation is happening to you, and I'm also going to press them about their practices generally, and hopefully I can solve it for you, but like I cannot verify, I can't guarantee anything along those lines. So I think it's a good exercise if you haven't, to think about what you would consider an information gap in your community. And a really easy way to go do it is to go look at United Way has this 211 data in any community that they serve. 211 is the service where you call and it'll recommend you to go to the food bank locations, or what to do if you're at risk of homelessness, where the homeless shelters are. And there's like kind of a menu of options, kind of like texting. And they have the data about how many people are selecting what option. So if you're wondering what are like the most urgent needs in your community, and there is that data, I would recommend looking at it. But, you know, both qualitatively and quantitatively, there's a lot of other things that you know about what you have heard the most from people, you know, the concerns and questions that they have. And yeah, I would recommend thinking about that and thinking about like what is the actionable information that you would provide them. And that may even be looking at kind of the service journalism that you've done on the web and thinking about like what is the 500 character, 200 character version of this article? What are the most essential pieces of information? And then a little bit bigger picture further down the line, but I think that text is different in ways that are really awesome. As I think David alluded to, you don't, you know, you can bang out a message pretty easily without having to do sort of all of the wraparound stuff that goes into an article. Just kind of straight the reporting, and you know, you got as far as you got, and you can be clear about how far the information goes with the user and ask them what else they need to know. So that's easier in many ways, but you still have to have whatever set of standards, you know, in your newsroom that you want to apply in terms of, you know, for example, one thing that we always do is there are a lot of city services and the phone number changes or the menu changes, and you can't ever actually get someone on the phone. And so making sure we call every number, every service that we offer to someone, we've tried it out ourselves. And we're kind of building in a like quarterly check of all of those. And then like simple things like, are you gonna use AP style or whatever you use for agency names? Are we spelling out the name of every agency? Are we being a little bit more informal about those things? I think that kind of having those things in place before you start something like this helps you not make it up as you go or kind of come up against those questions as you're doing it. How will you build trust and how will you promote it? Those kind of go hand in hand. You got to have the trust before people will use it, but you also have to, how are they going to get there if they haven't seen it a bunch of times? We've done a lot of things over the years, including some purchase of numbers in the very early days. And other than that, I think that the promote it piece is, you know, those we have a lot more tools for. The trust, one of the ways that we've thought about that is as much as we can offering something to the user before we ask for anything. So explaining who we are, giving them a piece of information, telling them that they can use the keywords, but like just typing it in is all we're going to ask. We're not going to ask for much more than that until we've built in some trust. How will you handle abuse? I think it's a pretty easy one. Block people, but it does come through. And I think that there is the ability, you know, I think many reporters have been on the phone with someone who maybe is in need, but is not handling the conversation well and trying to figure out how you're going to serve users in a crisis while also protecting staff in your newsroom is really important. And then, yeah, this last piece took us a while. There was a good maybe 5 years or so where it was really hard to get buy-in from some people in the industry, from funders, because it was so, even though much of it is very similar to other work that they care about and, you know, journalism in general cares about, I think the format was just different enough that it was confusing to people. And before we really had a website and kind of all this, like, here is an article about the thing that we did, it was really hard to demonstrate how we were serving people, how it was reporting in journalism and not, you know, advocacy or customer service or anything like that. And yeah, I think if we had thought about that piece from the beginning, we could have been a bit more effective, a little bit faster. Yeah, this is partially from, we did a little hands-on session a couple months ago where we did some draft text messages and we gave them to people to edit and had people work on them. And if anyone wants those, I'm happy to send them. But it's a good experiment. And I think similarly to, you know, what we were talking about with audio, if you went through a story and tried to maybe just take, if you have like an FAQ, one FAQ question, and think about how you would send it to someone as a text message, I think you're going to cut down a lot of information. You're going to make sure you have all of the accessible information. That's something I meant to mention earlier. We always, when we're texting, when there is a phone number to call, even if the web version is easier or has more information, we always include it because we want people to be able to get it however they can. Those in Detroit, those are mostly the options. It's on the city website or a phone call or the service provider. But yeah, let's see. I think I talked a little bit about the anonymity. I think part of what we want to do with the property lookup is a good example where someone can be using the service and they may be asking about their friend's house, their grandma's house that came up this week. It may be their house. They may be a homeowner who's behind on their taxes. They may be a renter whose landlord isn't paying their taxes. Those are like all very different situations. And we want to be able to help someone in any of them without kind of assuming that any of those particular situations is going on. And I think that we kind of default to not exactly hands off. We try to like make it clear that we are around, we're available, but we're not going to push people. People will send in an address and it'll say that there's tax debt, and we'll reach out and say like, hey, do you need anything? They don't answer, we're not going to like come back and push, and we're not going to like give them every resource in the world. We're going to leave it up to them because sometimes asking people to it is a very personal, vulnerable thing to have someone who is known to you as a person telling you about talking to you as if you're going to be evicted. Like, if you don't want to have that conversation, we're not going to force you to have that conversation because it is a much more intimate space to be in. And yeah, I think that is about it. Let's see. Do we have anything else? Yeah, that is the long and short of it. If there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
Okay, question. How do people find your number? I guess what are the different ways? What's the most, do you know what the most common way that people get access to the number?
So we have 700,000 phone numbers. A lot of that was list buying in the early days, but kind of slow growth since then. We promote on our website and in our newsletters. We have a lot of people getting it from a friend or from like a block club. Like, we've got printed material all over the city. We've been talking about a billboard. But I think that a lot of it is, there's a good amount that is word of mouth, where someone will, they'll copy the text message and send it to someone, and it comes that way. We've been pushing a lot more now, and we are getting people kind of texting in, sometimes just to see what it is. Sometimes they do have an actual question. But yeah, we get a lot of repeat, which is great. Once we have a reporter conversation with someone, they almost always come back at some point.
I have one. Okay. It strikes me that a lot of the people that first contact you might be, reaching out for help. They're not exactly sure where, and you're ultimately guiding them. But it sounds as if some of the questions are almost more seeking a social worker and that kind of human help that they provide. How do you deal with the individual
Yeah. That's one of the ways where it gets into being clear about what, like, the limits of what you can offer. I think with something like, say you say like, I'm about to be evicted and I'm worried I'm going to be homeless. We're like first going to offer you the resource that we, have vetted as like being available. So, and we're going to ask, hey, have you called the housing helpline? It's this number. They provide XYZ, and try it and tell us how it goes. And then they say, I tried it and it didn't work. And that's where we say, well, why not? And then sometimes it's because they didn't do it right, or because any sorts of things that are not a problem with the resource itself. And when that happens, I think it's more assistance than most reporters are providing people, but it still definitely has limits. In terms of like, we will help you walk through an application, not all the time, but with some regularity, which is like kind of caseworker. But it is all in service of learning, one, for helping those people, and then also being able to come in when it is the resource, the system that is failing, because that happens way more commonly than I think, then gets reported anyways, in small ways. And just the reporter calling and asking the question that is sometimes the work. They say, oops, we'll fix that. Whereas they weren't going to for the person. And
so am I right in sort of understanding it in my mind, like you're not the caseworker who's going to go fight City Hall for that person, but you're going to help that person find who can, or find if they can?
we're gonna call, we call like DTE all the time, because they do stupid stuff with people's bills. And we say, hey, you shut off this customer and their bill shows that they had another 30 days. I'm making that up. But so that kind of sounds caseworkery.
Yeah,
it is like the system is supposed to work in a certain way, and if it doesn't, trying to help someone get the assistance that we know that they are, that it's an information gap and a resource gap, and then taking it in the accountability gap direction when it is that versus a mistake or something else. Yeah.
Well, I'm just really impressed with what you do, and it's certainly not easy.
Gary, do it. Kate, thank you for that. It was really helpful to see all the example exchanges. You come from the state of Big Gretch. She's out on TV quite a
hate
bit.
that name.
Yeah, but I think for people living in California and outside, that seems like a cool nickname that she's adopted for herself because we're so far away.
Michigan governor, for anyone who I don't know.
Yeah, Gretchen Wilmer. Oh my God. So I'm watching too much broadcast media. That's the problem. So that's the name of a book, Big Gretch, I think. So let me get to the question. So in the city mayoral races, or in the state race for governor, in the debates, has any of this kind of information gap, resource gap, accountability gap that the utilities are implicated in, water, electricity, land, property, and so on, has that surfaced in the form of questions or responses? And what do they say? Because you folks have been at this for a while, and you can literally diagnose these utility organizations. What's the sense you see on how they discuss what the people of the city actually experience and feel, especially lower income homes, as you showed in your slide?
I mean, I think it's similar to any, if reporting on an issue that affects a lot of people, and you might see a little bit of change and also things stay the same. Like there's a lot of money for affordable housing in the state this year and in the city, but there also homelessness rates are growing. So it's one of those, I think the language of that gap is not something that we see people using, but DTE is an interesting one. I wouldn't credit it to just Outlier, but just more attention on them in general. We've seen a lot more public pressure, as well as like the city council has no regulatory role, but they've they've done their kind of the legislative power they do have, send a resolution to the state legislature about specifically DTEs. The way they sell their debt, and then debt collectors garnish wages of people who owe money, which to me seems crazy, but that it's the same, if there's accountability reporting, I think sometimes you get a little bit of change and sometimes most of the time you don't. Does that feel, is that a depressing way to, I don't know. I don't think I'm answering your question, but.
I was just wondering how much of this percolates the discourse that people who are not experiencing these issues, who may be middle income and upper income folks, whether they get to hear about this at the level of accountability that politicians and policymakers have. That sense for me doesn't come out in the Bay Area, because these issues exist in the Bay Area too, the so-called high per capita income part of the world. So that's why I asked.
Anyone else? Yes.
Thank you. So I'm kind of wondering, how do you guys combat misinformation? Maybe people come in with presumed opinions or misinformation they heard and seeking clarification. How does that kind of work through the text system?
Yeah.
I mean, you might not be able to change somebody's mind at the end of the day, but at least have them informed.
Yeah, I would say so. Like, a lot of the questions we get are really,
I guess I should specify also with like you mentioned elections earlier, so that's why I was bringing that up.
yeah. So I think like some of a lot of the basic misinformation we get is like info gap misinformation, like, oh, I didn't know this program existed, or like, actually I like do qualify for X. So it's not really like misinformation in the same way. We just kind of started there's a misinfo keyword, or no, it's fact check. That's what it is. We wanted to be a little bit more neutral than misinfo. And we basically offer to look into any claim that you've heard that you're curious about. And we've had some people use it, and mostly in a very good faith way. We haven't experienced, as far as I know, people who have like who the texting that they're doing with us shows like a really deep belief in something that is not correct. And I don't know how texting would do at that. I'd be curious, but I think mostly people are coming because they don't know about stuff. And the voting stuff that we have gotten has mostly been pretty straightforward about like, how does my ballot work? And I think that is useful to know that it's the simple stuff that you can Google, but sometimes it's just not clear or formatted in exactly the way you want. Like the partisan straight ticket thing has come up over and over again. It's like, I think, a ballot design problem, but yeah, the thing I mentioned earlier about the immigration stats, that was the first time I'd seen something like that, where someone saw something in the news and they wanted it validated, and it clearly is a partisan issue, but they didn't come to it in our system as a part, in that kind of way. So much as I'd like to know how they used it, I think it's easier to just be like, we're just here to provide this information for you, and we're not going to kind of weigh in on it.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.